Hey, welcome everyone. Welcome to today's deep dive. Today we're here with two special guests. We have Dr. Miriam Parker and we have Dr.Tinsae Tsegaye. We will be talking about residency applications for the US, and we will be focusing on how to work on your application, how to prepare for interviews. I will start with introducing our first guest. We have Dr. Miriam Parker, who is a board-certified internal medicine physician who spent her entire career spanning over 25 years in graduate medical education. She served as both a program director and a designated institutional official, and brings a keen understanding of the residency application and recruitment process from these roles. During her years of service to the GME community, she has interviewed thousands of IMG applicants and has been responsible for reviewing countless ARAS applications. She has a particular interest in ensuring that every personal statement tells a unique personal story. Dr. Parker has worked tirelessly with her own residents and medical students to ensure that their applications for residency and fellowships are polished, professional, and have a distinctive voice. Her signature strengths include writing excellence, compassion for those she assists, and a well-defined sense of purpose. In addition to her academic oversight roles, she's a certified executive and well-being resilience coach and has been recognized for her strong mentorship and leadership skills. Thanks for being with us today, Dr. Parker. We're very excited to have you join us. And Dr. Akia will introduce our second guest.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I'm too incredibly happy to be here today, and I would thank Residency for telling me about this opportunity and inviting me to speak with you all.
Thank you. So our second guest who's here with us is Dr. Tinsae Tsegaye. Dr. Tinsae Tsegaye received his medical degree from EDSA University in 2021. He immediately started his USMLE journey and took step 1 in December 2021 and scored 260. He took step 2 in July 2022 and scored a 274. He applied during the March 2023 cycle into internal medicine and had over 15 interviews. Currently, Dr. Tinsae is a PGY1 resident at Jefferson University, Einstein Medical Center. He's interested in pursuing an academic career in gastroenterology. He's very passionate about mentorship and one of the administrators behind the leading Ethiopian USMLE group, Match Ready. In his free time, he can be found passionately supporting his beloved football team, Chelsea, and reading historical fiction books. Dr. Tinsae, thank you for being with us so much. This is not the first time that he's been helping us in this mentorship program for those who are on USMLE pathway. We're very grateful to have you. And now we'll go to our first presentation. Dr. Parker, you can share your screen and start. Thank you for being here.
I will try to get this right. This is never my strong suit. Perfect. Okay, well, perfect. Well, you know, for the last, let me just give you a couple of introductory comments, and that is, you know, I was always on the end of giving, of interviewing people. And over the years, there were so many people that I saw that had delightful things on their application, had great things about their candidacy, and yet when they came to their interviews, they didn't do well. They couldn't seem to relate to the individual that was there exactly what a tremendous candidate they were. And additionally, even before the interview, there were often many things about the ARAS applications that didn't really set people up for success. And as we'll see, I think every single piece of the application process is important. Every single comma, every single word, and certainly all the details that you have to know about the ARAS application process, and then about how to interview, I think really come into play if you're going to present yourself in the best possible light. And so, you know, leaving the program directorship, my goals now are to really ensure that individuals who are applying understand the process, at least some of the process that I can help them with. There are parts of the process that I don't know. And so that I have to leave that to some of individuals like our other guest speaker today, who've been through all of this and understands it in a different way than I do. But my goal has really been to make people shine. And so this is really a sort of potpourri. It's some things that I think are important. I don't know where all of the individuals who are listening today are in their residency application journey. I would assume that some of you haven't applied yet. Some of you have applied. So things may be germane to different groups of the audience here today, but I hope that I have something that I can give to everyone. We will go ahead and then skip the background, because that was such a lovely background that was already presented. But I would say that I trained over 250 residents, and many of them, as probably some of you know, were Ethiopians. And so my heart has been, I really have had a great deal of joy in being able to train individuals from your country, from all over the world, but really many people who just excelled in ways that I'm sure you all could imagine, but excelled tremendously during their residency and then on into fellowship or whatever other jobs that they took on afterwards. So our country needs excellent internal medicine docs, it needs family docs, it needs all sorts of physicians here. And I really believe that getting exceptional international medical graduates is incredibly important. So I have a few propositions to make for you to begin with. And I would start by saying, excuse me, that I think very few applicants, at least in my experience, are aware of the comprehensive NRMP database that is available to them online for free. Every time I have had interviews with individuals, and sometimes I pull up some of this data to show them, it's as if they've never seen it before. And so, I'll show you some of it today, but I would certainly urge everybody to go and look at it. It's absolutely free for everybody, and you should use it to your advantage. My second proposition to you is no one is born knowing how to complete an application for residency, even if you've completed many other applications for many other things in your life. But no one is born knowing how to do that, nor is anyone born knowing how to ace an interview. It really is a very specific skill. And so interview success, application success, it requires knowledge about the process. It requires dedicated effort on your part. It requires a lot of attention to detail. And it requires the understanding, the ability to truly recognize that interviewing is a distinct skill. And even though you may be incredibly accomplished, and I have seen individual after individual who have incredible accomplishments in their life, it doesn't mean that they know how to interview well. I think, the other piece is that you have to be willing to fail, to practice and to practice and to fail until you really get it right. So that's my message in terms of my propositions. What I would like to do today is actually review some of the NRMP data for you. Give you some tips, not comprehensive tips. It's not everything you need to know, but tips about completing the ERIS application form itself. I have not gone into and do not intend to, unless somebody asks me a question about personal statements, because I think that's a whole other, large topic to attack. But we're going to talk about just completing the ERIS application form, the standard form. And then what's really near and dear to me is, how do you prepare for interviews? What's common to great interviews? What's common with poor interviewing? Some of the components of a structured interview, which is really by and large the type of interviews that you're going to see. There are some other types of interviews, but structured interviews are pretty much what you're going to meet up with as an applicant. And then what I would call the anatomy of a great interview answer that I think you can apply to almost any question that you're given. So let's talk a little bit about some of the NRMP data. This is data from 2023, so it's last year's data. And I wanted just to point out to you the number of individuals who actually submit their rank lists. Overall, there were about 43,000. You see 42,952 people. So about 43,000 people who submitted their rank lists last year, because not everybody that applies ends up submitting a rank list for various reasons that aren't important, but you know, some people drop out, some people, all sorts of things can happen. If you look at the total US citizen IMGs, so those are individuals who live in this country, who go abroad to train. They may go to, you know, Europe, Asia, they may go down to, many of them go to the Caribbean. You can see that that applicant pool is about 5,000. And then if you look at your pool, the non-US citizen IMGs, that pool is about 8,500 and makes up about 20% of the pool. Now, the next piece of data looks at, on the right side of that slide, you can see that the USMDs, 94%, and then the USDOs, the doctors of osteopathy, 92%, they, you know, hands down have an advantage over you all in terms of their match rates. And that's just something that, you know, we have to all acknowledge is truly the case. When we look at the or the US citizen IMGs, they do a little bit better. They have 68% of individuals who apply that match, and that IMGs who were non-US citizens, like those of you who I'm speaking to today, have a 59% match rate. Now, and that's all comers. So we're not talking about particular specialties. We're talking about all comers. And there certainly is all the data in that NRMP database that you can look up. You can see if you want to do pediatrics, what's your chance of matching if you're an IMG? If you want to do orthopedics, what's your chance of matching if you're an IMG? You know, not specifically you as an IMG, but all IMGs obviously that applied combined. But when I look at that 59%, I think there's two ways of looking at it. Either you can take the, you know, take the viewpoint that, you know, that 41% of people don't match, or you can take the glass is full, half full approach that 59% of you who will apply will match, will get an opportunity to be in this country. And of course, depending on the specialty you apply to, your chances may be, you know, significantly more than 59% of matching. So to me, it's not a dreadful statistic. It's a statistic actually that I think is hopeful. And when you looked at this data before, if you go back 20 years, it was not 59%. So there has been an incremental increase, although I would say for the last, I think the data is something for the last 5, 6, 7 years, it has pretty much been held constant. So I think that's probably where we are. I don't necessarily anticipate that that's going to change, but you never know. We do have about, as you probably have read, about 100,000 slots in this country for doctors that the estimated lack of physicians in this country is about 100,000 physicians. So we have many physicians in the United States that we really need. And so, you know, we need all our slots filled. Now, this slide is, I included it because I thought it was important, and you have to realize this is all specialties. So this, again, it isn't medicine, it isn't peds. It's going to look different for different specialties. But if you take all the specialties together and you average out how many, for instance, applications a given program receives, the average program would receive 1,030 applications. For internal medicine, it's much larger. It's about 2,500 applications per program, but typically they'll have more spots, right? So for instance, if you look at this as an average, which I'm showing you, you might have orthopedics programs in here. Well, they only have 4 slots, maybe a year, many of them, or a fewer number of slots. So you have to realize that that number, the absolute number of applications received, is going to change significantly depending on the type of program it is. But the rest of the data doesn't look so differently in many of the programs. And that is, if you look at that 1030, you can see then the next bar down, which says 490, that is the applications that are rejected off the bat. Now, that means that those applications are typically rejected based on some screening criteria that the program director or the program committee will decide upon. They can decide on a score, which is very typical what they do. They can look at years since graduation. They can look at, if you don't have US experience, if you don't have letters of recommendation, they can look at a variety of things and decide that those are their screening characteristics and whittle down their list. Because we cannot, as program directors, look at 1,000 applications. We would never get through them. So after they've whittled down their list, they end up with about 435. And I know that those two numbers don't exactly add up to 1030. There's some information there that's missing, but nonetheless, maybe a little bit less than half of the applications that are received actually then get what they call a more, a holistic review, a deeper dive, where, they are going to look at everything. And this is why, as we'll see in the next part, when I'm talking about how you actually fill out that application, why I think it becomes so important, because anything that isn't really, isn't done well, I believe on the next, when you get to holistic review, is going to be a factor in them deciding to put you in the pile that says we're not going to interview them. They know that they can't interview 435 applicants. So people are going to be looking for things essentially that are going to move you either into the yes, we should interview pile, to the hold pile, or the reject pile. And, things like even, poor grammar could move someone into a we're going to reject that person pile. So it becomes really important how you do everything. At least, this is my true belief. After the 435 look, you have about 130 people then that are granted interviews. It's usually about 20 to 30%, it looks to me like, of the applicant pool that makes that first, that after the cut, that then ends up with an interview opportunity. And of those people that get interviewed, of those 130 people that get interviewed, 111 actually show up for the interview. So you might say, why would a person not show up for an interview? It's lots of reasons. Sometimes people get a pre-match offer and then they decline the rest of their interviews for the for the application season. They may, I know it sounds horrible, but some people have too many interviews and they decide, they pick and choose in the end. Or maybe they had 2 interviews and the only slot was November 11th for them to do the interview, and they had to pick one or the other, and they didn't have another opportunity. So there are many reasons why people may not go to all their interviews. But nonetheless, most people show up for their interviews. And look at the next thing. Out of the 111 people that they interview, almost everybody gets ranked. So if you get an interview, you are almost certain to be ranked unless there is something that really goes wrong in that interview. I think that's hopeful. The second piece is that if you go to your interview and you blow them away because you do such an exceptional job at your interview, guess what? It makes a huge difference where you're going to go into that pile, because typically once they've invited you for an interview, they've already decided that you can, that you're going to be good enough, that you're going to be able to do the academic work, you're going to be able to be a resident in that program. They're really looking in that interview for things like, because this is what I look at, is this person likable? Do I want to be with them for 3 years? Do they have qualities? Do they have personal qualities that I think are really going to be strengths, that are really going to be things that are going to make this program the right place for them to be? Would they fit into the culture of this program? Would they meld well with the other residents that are already in this program? So you have a great opportunity in your interview to communicate who you are and to try to push yourself higher on that list. And look at this information. This is fascinating to me. Now, let me just start by saying that, as you know, this is data from 2020. It's the newest data we have. And now step 1 scores are reported as pass fail, right? So there's going to be some difference that will emerge with the next time that they present this data. But if you look on the left, it shows all specialties and what is used for interview selection. So you can see that at least when your step 1 score was available, not as pass fail, but as a numerical value, many programs, and this is all comers, this again isn't germane just to IM or family medicine, it's everybody. Your USMLE step score by many people was considered the most important thing. This is program directors being asked. This is a questionnaire from program directors. That's interesting to me because personally, I don't think that step 1 scores really correlate in many ways with your overall performance in a residency at all, but yet they're used as a determining factor. Your letters of recommendation in your specialty, your USMLE step 2 score was considered important, and then you can see your personal statement, your dean's letter. You guys are sort of at a disadvantage, honestly, with your dean's letters because they're not very, usually they don't communicate much. They're very, they're sort of standardized and they don't really say much about the individual. But then if you look at internal medicine, look, they don't care as much about step 1, but step 2 CK score was very important for internal medicine. So again, if someone isn't ready to take their USMLE step 2, you should probably defer it till you've been able to study more because it's so important in terms of that screening process. And so on and so forth. So you can see, and you could play around with this because this is available data. You can look and see, in general, doesn't mean that the program that you're going to apply to, that the program director has this particular bent, but in general, it's going to tell you what's important to a cohort of program directors in a given specialty, that things that are important about interview selection, okay? Now this was internal medicine. And again, you can look at it in different areas, but this is what, which programs actually cared about your USMLE score requirements. So if you look, and again, this is 2020, so it's changed, but if you look at USMLE 1, you can see in 2020, 32% of programs said, we don't really care what their score is, just as long as they passed it. And the other 66% said, oh no, we care, we have a target score that we've set. When you looked at the USMLE step 2, 25% said it's okay if they just passed that, and they set a target score, and some people didn't even look at it. So it's really quite interesting that there's that degree of variability in terms of what people think about those scores. Nonetheless, I think you can't discount the fact that people care about those scores. People don't, what they don't care about is your USMLE score. They really don't, unless you failed it. You know, failure is a problem for most programs if you failed any part of your USMLEs, unless you can get somehow through the initial application, you know, cut. You're allowed to have an interview, and then you can actually demonstrate why you failed that exam. And with your repeat exam, you do very well on that exam. And I'm not talking about, you know, getting a 270 score, but I'm talking about, you know, at least getting something like a 240 on your repeat testing. All right, this is the next slide here, I think, before we're going to kind of end the stuff with the NRMP. And this just looks at internal medicine. Again, you can look at it for other specialties, but these were the step 2 target scores for interviews. So this is sort of a complicated, this whisker plot type of thing that you see, but I think you can get a sense that on the left side are the scores that people had where they did not get interviews, and then on the right are the scores that people had who did get interviews. And really that area within the 2 bars that's grayed out, that is from the 25th to the 75th percentile. So if you take a line somewhere in the middle of that, you would say, you know, I would say that if you have less than a 220, you're probably not likely to get interviewed. And if you have more than a 240, for sure, you're probably going to get interviewed. And then there's this gray area where you can see with the programs from somewhere around, you know, 225 to 240, 230, which is kind of a gray area about what's going to happen with you. So obviously the higher the CK score is, the more likely you will get an interview. But I've also had people who have exceptional step 2 and step 1 scores who don't interview well. And so that in and of itself would not lead me to place them high on a match list. So, all right, enough about the NRMP stuff, but I want you to all know that there is all this information out there on the web, that all you have to go is to the NRMP match data, and you can play around with all these different monographs, and then some of them are actually interactive things that are available to you. And I would really encourage you to look at that. And don't look at don't try not to be discouraged when you look at it. Try to look at it, dispassionately and in a way that it can inform choices for you as to how to, apply appropriately and make decisions about and recognize your chances with different scores that you may have. Okay. All right, let's get on to the ARIS application itself. It has become a much easier application to fill out, but it has some unique challenges, I think, for individuals. And so I'm just going to talk about some of them, and I'm sure that other people here who are in the middle of the process may have some other comments, but these are my comments from what I see and from what I understand about the application. First of all, one of the first things after you put in sort of, some issues about your name and where you are and your visa status and these sorts of things is your geographic preferences. And you have up to 3 geographic preferences, and you know that it's the United States is then broken down into these areas. And so the geographic preference is an opportunity for you to communicate your preferences, or your lack thereof of preferences. Your preference selection. So if you say, I'm interested, let's say in the South Atlantic regions, you have people in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, whatever, Georgia, Florida. If you put in that as one of your preferences, but you don't put in the mountain region as your preferences, but you still apply for programs in the mountain region, they're not going to see that the South Atlantic was a preference for you. Only the program director, the programs that fall into your areas of preference will know that it was your preference. So to me, it seems pretty evident that indicating a preference is a good thing, because I would imagine that many of you, even though I understand you would go anywhere pretty much to have a residency, you still have preferences, and you should capitalize on those preferences, especially if there are many programs that are clustered in a given region that you have applied to, because it's more likely, the more programs you've applied to in a given area, that you may get an interview at one of them. And if you've communicated a preference, it's important. And here's why. It's fascinating. This is preliminary data, because it hasn't been around very long that you could communicate these preferences. But if your preference aligns with the program that is looking at you and wanting to interview, look at this. If you look at this chart, and I hope you can see it, the red looks at people who were aligned, their preferences was aligned with where the program was geographically. And then the other 2 are, the blue is no geographic preference, and then the other one is a different geographic preference outside of a given program. But look at how much more likely you were to be given an interview if your preference aligned. The median interview offer, if your program was aligned with, if your preference was aligned with their program location, was 15% versus 4% of either the other categories. So to me, I think there's more information in that data that we may not understand, but still, to me, it says you'd be a fool for not indicating a preference if you really do indeed have one, especially in areas where much of your application is clustered. It just may give you a little bit more of an advantage. But I would say that most people that I have looked at their applications this application season have communicated preferences, but maybe 10% of people just left the whole thing blank, said no preference whatsoever. There's also the urban and suburban preference, that you can use. That I don't think is very important. But I definitely would urge you guys to look at the geographic thing and see if it has anything to do with you. Okay, selected experiences. This is an interesting one. Because what I find is that there are individuals who leave parts of this blank. They leave it blank. I don't know why. There are fields in this that are required. You can see, if you look at that selected experience, you can see there's organization where you had that selected experience. You got to complete that. You got to use the drop down experience, drop down to indicate the experience type, the position title, etc., your start, your end date, where the experience was located. But look at the rest: participation frequency, primary focus area, setting, key characteristics, and your context and your roles. Those aren't required. But I don't know why anybody wouldn't do that. And I've seen applications where they didn't say what the key characteristic was, what the setting was, what the focus area was. So I would say complete the application completely. Use everything you can to indicate. Don't make the interviewer try to guess what on earth you were doing there. And then when it gets to this context, roles, and responsibilities portion, I see the majority of people putting in what I call is the laundry list or the shopping list of things that they did during that experience. If they were worked as an observer, they said they checked in the patients, they reviewed the patient's charts, they discussed things with with the physician who was supervising them. They utilized ERIS, they had interactions with the nurses. They lived a whole lot of bullet points. And I don't even read all the bullet points because it tires me out and it doesn't really communicate much. I want to see a few short narratives that tell me, what did you really do there? What was your role there? Not everything you did. I don't really care about some things. Pick the things that were most important and that you think if a program was looking at that, it would be the most important things to me. There's some things that I'm just not going to care about. And don't dilute the impact of the experience by putting things in that, yes, you did them, but they're really not relevant to your journey towards a residency. Okay, so that takes a little bit of thought, but I would not just list bulleted points, which is what I see at least 50% or more of people do in this portion of their application. Meaningful experiences. Do you know that some people don't fill this out? That I find incredible. So it's sort of like passing on the fact that anything you did was meaningful. This is really an opportunity to pick carefully and to pick different things that had different meaning to you. So it shouldn't be all the same. It really should be something that was really impactful to you and that highlights a different aspect of your application. And they tell you, I'm quoting this directly from ERIS, if you can't read the small print there, reflect on the experience. Why was it meaningful? How did it influence you? Again, sometimes people just write what they did. I mean, that's nice, but that's not what it's to be used for. Weave in the focus area, the key characteristics that you tagged. And it should not just describe, again, what you did with a list of skills, okay? And don't leave it blank. The impactful experience part, which is part of this holistic review that I've talked about, which has to do with looking at you as an individual and the context in which you have applied. There are many of you that I would dare say have had potentially some extreme financial struggles. There are people who have had health struggles personally or with their family. There have been situations of war, of disruption to communities, of outbreaks of illnesses with COVID and other things. And these impact the ability of an individual to function in certain ways and can explain certain hardships. They also, in addition to explaining, let's say if there is something on your application that is less than, They can also demonstrate your incredible grit, resilience, whatever you want to call it, and can highlight the fact that even in the circumstances of all these obstacles, difficulties, etc., that you as an individual were able to overcome them and are sitting here waiting for someone to say, yes, I want to, that they want to interview you. So I believe that this is twofold. It allows you to discuss why you might not have had something on your application that is, a score, for instance, that wasn't great. And it also allows you to talk about how resilient you are by demonstrating what your experiences are, not doing an expose about, I'm the most resilient person in the world. No, it's describing the challenges and how you met those challenges. Okay, so I think many of you should fill out this portion. If you don't have something like that, I would say don't fill it out. It's not actually a required, and it shouldn't. Like when I was applying to medical school, at residency, even had there been something like this and there wasn't, I wouldn't have qualified. I didn't really have financial hardships. I mean, I was fortunate. I didn't really, have family issues or community issues. I mean, yeah, I had loans to pay back and stuff like that, but it wasn't anything that I could ever have argued impacted my ability to progress in my residency journey or in some way delayed me or was something that was, incredibly difficult to overcome. Far from it. Okay, I think we're getting to the end of the application tips, but scholarly activities. So they have made it so easy for you now, because I used to see these scholarly activities listed, and I would see them listed in whatever format the applicant thought they should put it in, which was usually not a standard format. It was sort of my idea of how you cite a scholarly activity, a poster, a book chapter, something like that. Now it's easy. You have to put in everything. But remember, please put in the capitals properly and put in the commas and these sorts of things. Make sure that you do that appropriately. It will then do the rest for you, which is lovely. But make sure that you do that according to the proper style guidelines, and you can actually look them up. All you have to do is go to the web and look up, citation reference, something like that, about how to do this. And you can use there's different style books. It's not really that important which one you use, but make sure that you conform to that. Again, this is what I would call a detail that's important, because I can tell you by and large, and I mean no disrespect, that a US applicant would know how to do this, and an IMG might not do it properly. And that just says to the person who's reviewing your application, this individual doesn't have that skill, and it sets you apart. Your application is going to set you apart because you have a whole different set of experiences than most US. But you don't want to be set apart because your grammar wasn't perfect or because you didn't capitalize something. Not in any way, shape, or form do you want that to be there for the viewer to use as a negative against you. Okay. Finally, this is something new, and maybe our other panelists can talk about this, because I am not that familiar with it, but I did listen to the webinar about it, and so I'm going to tell you about it. It is something called program signals. About 2 years ago, and I think part of it had to do with the fact that people were applying in such numbers. US applicants were applying to, hundreds of programs. And so the programs were getting many, many, many applications, and they were having a hard time figuring out how to even review them all. Program applications actually went up during COVID because so much of stuff was going to be virtual. And so it made it easier for people to apply that otherwise didn't apply, because even if they applied, they wouldn't have had money to come to interviews, et cetera, et cetera. They started something called program signals, which was your opportunity to express an interest in a particular program. Now, not all specialties, I think, accepted these program signals. So for people to be able to send a signal, the specialty had to agree that they wanted, as a group, to accept these program signals. And And your specific program back in, I guess it's usually about May or June when we have to sign our agreement with the match, we would have to indicate that we were interested in receiving program signals. So some programs may have not done it because they didn't know about it, or they weren't. I can't imagine that anybody wasn't really interested in it, but it's a relatively new process, and I don't think people are very familiar with it. But having said that, I think they will get more familiar with it. But it's your opportunity to express your interest in a residency program. Now, it indicates your interest at the time that you fill out your ARIS application. So things could change, and they caution the program directors and everybody that this interest in a given program isn't immutable. It could change over time, but nonetheless, you indicate your interest at the beginning when you apply. As I've just talked about, it can only be for programs and specialties that opt in. But here's the interesting thing. From 2023, from last year, if you sent a program signal, it increased your chance of getting an interview with that program. Again, why? Because programs want you to love them. They want, just like we want to be loved, they want to be loved. Oh, that person wants to come to my program. Now, the caveat is with every specialty, they set a number, a limit on the number of signals. So in medicine, it was 7. You could only do it with 7 programs. You couldn't tell every program you were applying to that you loved them. They didn't know. And some programs were much less than that, but that was how it worked. And let's just look at this, because I find this not maybe unexpected, but not to use this now that we have this data seems to me to be crazy. So like I said, if you signaled to the program that you were interested in them, you were much more likely to be granted an interview. Look at this. Applicants who sent a signal, and this is with internal medicine, we don't have the data on all specialties, okay, not from what I saw on the webinar, but from the webinar I looked at it, you know, they did maybe 8 specialties that they reviewed, some of the major ones: internal medicine, pediatrics, family medicine, general surgery. But you can see in medicine, if you sent a signal, the median of interview offers was 32%. 32%. And if you didn't send a signal, it was 7%. So sending a signal obviously has benefit to you because it's indicating to the program, when they know that you just have 7 of these that you can send, that this is a program that you're really interested in. And I don't know how different programs are using it. I don't know if they're, you know, if in the way that you do ARIS, I mean, I'm sure that you can have, you know, a special basket. It may already be set up for you this year. I don't know, but there may be a basket that the program gets right away saying this person signaled they were interested in the program. And then they start looking at those people. They may be the first people they look at. I have no idea. What you don't want to do as a program is you don't want to give people interviews that you don't think want to come there, because you're wasting your interviews. You're wasting your interview slots. And interview slots are precious not only to an applicant, but they're precious to a program. I mean, I knew when I was a program director that there were people that came from certain parts of the country that never matched into my program. They just didn't come there. And so I often wouldn't interview them because I knew that the chances, it was like throwing away one of my interview slots. Okay, so those of you who are moving into the match next year, I would pay a lot of attention to the geographic preferences and the signals, because I think that makes a difference. Now, I don't think that there's any evidence that says if you both signal your preference and signal your geographic preference that there's some additive effect. I don't know that, but there may be. So I don't really know. But there you have it. Okay, so let's move into some things related to interviews now. All right, well, I've already told you that you should not assume that life has prepared you to sail through an interview. But what life has done for you, and many of you have incredible things on your applications, life has given you great material for an interview. And it's your job to try to organize your experiences into nice rehearsed packages that are going to highlight you to the interview. This is something that I find people do not do well. They don't know what to highlight. And oftentimes when I start talking to an interview candidate, something that they didn't even put on their resume turns out to me, because we've gone off the path a little bit, there may be something that they didn't find that was meaningful, that when they start telling me about it, it's the most meaningful thing to me they've said all in the 20 minutes that we've been talking, because it says something about who they are as a person, like a deep core value that they hold because of the way they relate that particular experience. So don't discount things that that you don't believe are that important, because they can have a tremendous impact, I believe, on the interviewer to to show how unique you are. For instance, I had somebody the other day who was from a different country who practiced a certain kind of meditation. It was called Vipassana meditation. This was a meditation type where you really had to consider, the external forces, internal forces, and it was really about balancing yourself, sort of finding equanimity. And he had been practicing this and done courses in it for like 10 years. He wasn't even going to mention that in his interview at all. And I said, oh my goodness, this is something that I am not going to find on 300 applications. Nobody is going to talk about this, but you're going to talk about this because this is something that is unique to you and actually can inform the way that you deal with stress, the way that you show that you're a person who thinks deeply about things. This is going to show up on your interview if you use this experience. I had another woman the other day who was an artist, and she had drawn for many years. She had used her drawings to decrease stress every day. She actually said she spent like an hour with her watercolors and this and that. And more recently, she had gotten into digital art. And I said, what's digital art? And she told me about her digital art and how she was, coming up with sort of a serial, like a comic strip, so to speak, I guess, but stories that she was going to do in digital art. And she said, I've already created three of my characters. And I said, I fleshed them out. I know what they're going to be, they look like, and what they're going to wear and their characteristics. And I said, tell me about one of those characters. And she told me that the character was a woman. And it was a woman who, was a sort of warrior and who was powerful and did this and that and was able to, accomplish these things. And I said, so was that modeled after you? And she said, I don't know. And I said, oh my goodness. I mean, here you are. And she had an incredible history. I said, maybe unconsciously, consciously you're not aware of that, but it certainly does seem like an important thing that you've done, and you spend a lot of time doing it. Figure out a way to weave that in to your interview, because I will then remember you as the strong, applicant who did art and, and segued into digital art and is doing something about the empowerment of women. And, how could you forget that? Because when it comes down to at the end, when people are being ranked for their interview, we'll see this in a second. What really matters? What matters is their interpersonal skills during the interview. It matters what you brought up that's memorable. And too often people just feel like they need to recite their resume to me. They tell me I did this and I did that and I won a gold medal and I scored this. And then I went to, I was a GMO and I worked in an underserved region and we were dealing with malaria and this and that. And it sounds like every other application. Not that the experiences weren't tough and defining of your, of many characteristics in you, but they're not memorable to me. They're not different to me. And you have to do things which are going to be different. So scour your material for things that may not seem at first that they could be relevant, but actually tell a story about your humanity, about special skills that you have, because each one of you have those stories, okay? So the other thing with your interviews, you just have to anticipate all the common questions. Now they can throw some crazy question at you, but they're going to be, I mean, I have a list that I give people of 35 35 common questions. You need to be ready for those questions. You can't sit there when I ask you, well, what do you think your weaknesses are, and act like you were surprised that you had that question. That's crazy. You've got to be prepared for those questions, but you've got to be prepared in a way, which is to my next point, that you have to practice your answers to those questions until the answer becomes ingrained in you and you can communicate it spontaneously. You can't sound like, I've had many people, it sounds like they go, okay, track number 4, my personal strengths. And then they turn on the, they turn on the tape and they start talking, and it doesn't sound spontaneous. It sounds rehearsed. That's not what you want to hear either. So that's what I mean when I say being good at interviews is an art and it takes practice. The other thing with interviews is you've got to pay attention to nonverbal skills. You got to pay attention to where you're positioned in your camera, you know, in your screen, your camera, what you wear, your body language. I mean, I've had people who do this. They rock during the interview. I tell them when we do post-interview analysis, I said, you got to stop that. I don't know what you need to do that, but you must stop doing that. You know, people who they don't look directly at the camera, and I understand it's a challenge with the internet, but you can't be looking down. You can't be looking all over the place like you're searching for answers. I had one person, it was clear they had all their answers to questions on a screen in front of them because they were directing their attention right to this area on their screen, and their eyes were fixed there. And I said, are you reading from a script? And they said, well, I've got something up there. And I said, no, it can't be like that. It has to feel spontaneous. You have to get rid of that, even though it's going to probably take you hours to learn how to do this properly. Okay, so what kind of interviews are you going to see? There are panel interviews. There are interviews where they go from station to station. Usually these are not the interviews that you're going to see most likely in anything related to medical residency. Although you may have different people who interview you, right? So you'll have maybe the program director who would interview, or the associate PD, or a faculty member, or a resident. Don't discount anybody who could be interviewing you has a role in what they indicate on their post-interview scoring sheet, or whatever you would like to call it. But in general, they're really content-related components. So some places have a standardized list of the questions they want everybody to be asked. Some people just have types of questions that they want you to ask. I always had a list of questions that I asked, but I never stuck to those necessarily. I went wherever the interview would take me. And there were certain things that the applicants thought were really important that I might ask that I really didn't ask, because those questions weren't important to me. I was trying, as I said, to figure out whether or not this was someone I wanted to be with, whether this was someone who had the basic characteristics that I wanted to see: determination, an ability to do teamwork, a curiosity, honesty, integrity, those sorts of things. Those were the qualities I was always looking for. And sometimes people could, if you had something that you put down on your resume, and they said, I'm an avid reader. And then I asked them, well, so am I. What's the latest book you've read? And they couldn't tell me one book. That was very problematic for me. So anything that you put down on your resume, be prepared that you could be asked about it. Really be prepared, because you never know what that person is going to find interesting. And I often ask questions about things that I don't think that the applicant ever thought I would go to from their application, but to me, were going to tell me a lot more about that person. Okay, in addition to these general questions, they often use behavioral or situational questions. I'll tell you what those are in a second if you're not familiar with it. And then interestingly, listen, there's some places where they don't believe that the interviewers should have any information about you before the interview. They don't give them the ERIS application or your personal statement, so they may not know. So be aware that that could be the case. I don't think it's common, but some people actually practice that. They think the applicant should be more of a blank slate. I never did that. I found like, I needed to ask them a lot of questions about their application potentially, especially if there was a problem with the application. And I wanted to find out whether or not I could excuse that particular problem, whether it was a gap or whether it was a score or, a failure or a poor grade in something. I would go to those questions and I would ask directly about it because, I needed to know. They're also, generally speaking, all the individuals who are going to be interviewing you will have some kind of a standardized form to complete with rating scales, various performance. I mean, they may say, your communication style, your ability to speak English and communicate, your general appearance, whether it was professional or not, your education, your whatever it is. There are a variety of things that programs will decide upon, and they're usually things that can be rated numerically, in addition to some kind of a narrative that usually people will fill out. Behavioral questions. These are lovely questions because people, I think they're great questions to ask, and you'll get lots of them. The behavioral questions really make the assumption that past behavior is going to predict future behavior, right? So if you did something one way at some point, then you're probably going to act that way in the future. It usually follows the format where they'll say something like, here I've got an example. Describe a time when you observed a member of your team behave in a fashion that was not consistent with protocol. Explain the context, the actions you took, and the outcome. So they're wanting you to tell them specifically what happened, what you did, how you remedied that situation or addressed that situation, and then what happened. So, sometimes it might be, have you ever had a situation where, you had a struggle with a coworker or, someone on your team, and could you give me some information about that and how you resolved those things? So it might be, a member of your team who wasn't pulling their weight or someone who wasn't showing up on time. And how did you address that? So what does that show me? That shows me how you are able to think about behavior that's sort of errant, that's off track a little bit. Are you going to give the individual who is displaying this kind of behavior a little bit of a break and try to understand why they were late? Or are you just going to chastise them for being late and say, we can't be late here, our work is very important, or are you going to say, I'm curious as to what happened today or the last couple of days because you've been late and that hasn't been how you've behaved in the past. Is there something that you want to talk to me about? Because maybe they have a kid who's sick at home, or maybe something else has happened, and then how you resolve that and what the outcome is really important for me to see. Okay, so behavioral questions, and then situational questions are similar. It's again based on the premise that your intentions are going to predict your future behavior, and it's hypothetical situations that they would ask you. I'd like to imagine you're on morning rounds. The chief resident described a difficult case that you and another PGY1 resident worked on earlier this week and complimented your handling of the situation, but actually it was mostly your coworker who was responsible. So they're giving you sole credit and failing to mention that your colleague played a role. What do? Do you stay silent? Do you step in? Do you acknowledge the other colleague? I mean, you see, these things actually show something about how you interact with others, how generous you are, how willing you are to, even if you're in the limelight and someone has given you this credit, how much you're willing to step back and say, you've given me a lot more credit than I deserve. It's really my coworker here that deserves the credit for solving this case. We worked together, but he was the one that really had the great breakthrough or something. So see, that shows a lot about a person how they answer a question like that. All right, what's common to great interviews? Well, I think first that you have the appropriate backdrop, the appropriate attire, the camera angles and all that, that you don't have distracting things in your background. Like where I'm sitting now that you can see me, this would be an awful interview background. You want to see something plain. You don't want to see something with, you know, half of a picture or a light switch or something like that in the background. You do not want your interviewer to be distracted in any way other than seeing you. You want to engage in a two-way conversation. The best interviews really are like conversations. They're not, you know, recitations back and forth. I ask the question, you provide the answer, and so on and so forth. They really turn into conversations. And it's all about storytelling. It's really about taking every question that you're asked and using that to tell a little story about yourself, the way that you resolved a problem, the way that, you know, something about you. Good interviews show the people to be engaged. There's interaction, there's smiles, there's understanding, appreciation of the other person. And even though it's harder virtually, you can do that. It's spontaneous. It seems really honest. The applicant will admit certain things, not admissions of things that are going to hurt you in the interview, because some people do that. They get so, you know, engaged with the interviewer and feel so comfortable, they start telling you stuff that they should never tell you and is going to actually work to their disadvantage. Okay, so you have to recognize that. The more comfortable you are with an interviewer, in a way, is that you have to be on a little bit more guard. I've had people tell me that they were just getting divorced the next week. They've told me about, you know, that the child who is now having illness and is having to be taken, you know, to doctors and things like this. Now, that shouldn't disqualify a person for residency, but as a program director, I'm looking at you trying to figure out, am I going to have a person who's not going to be absent, who's going to be able to be present? Is this newly divorced person going to have issues where they're going to get depressed about things and things like that? I mean, they're going through my mind when I make these decisions, right or wrong. They are part and parcel of who you are and what your situation is. And so you really don't want to give any program director who seems, or interviewer who makes you feel comfortable, the opportunity to find things out about you that you freely tell them that can harm you. We often said the people that you need to be scared of the most were when you had interviews with psychiatrists. I mean, because they kind of knew, or psychologists, because they knew how to get people really comfortable and draw these kinds of things out. But I tell you, over the years, it's been amazing what some people have told me. And I just wanted to go, oh my God, you know, I wish you hadn't told me that. Okay. Compassion, respect. There really does have to be the recognition that you're the interviewer and that I'm the interviewee, or that I'm the interviewer and you're the interviewee. But it shouldn't be stiff and stilted and, you know, and seem unnatural. And then in the end, I think it's important that the applicant say something, you know, positive, that you can say thank you for the interview, but that you also acknowledge how thankful you were, or how happy you were to have had the opportunity to have this conversation with the person who's in front of you. Poor interviews, kind of the opposite stuff, right? Bad lighting, bad camera, inappropriately distracting body movements, body positioning. I talk to my people who I do these mock interviews with about how they have to position themselves appropriately in the camera, because it makes a difference. It can either make someone seem more confident, or it can make someone seem less confident. It can make someone feel more as if they're not particularly interested, versus someone who appears really interested in the interview. Inappropriate attire. I've seen some of that. Mostly it's just distracting. It's like, it's not conservative. It's not conventional. They try to do something cute, but it doesn't really work. Questions that don't have conversational quality, that seem over rehearsed. Like I've said, it seems like you're just turning on the tape and giving a recitation. That doesn't go over very well. Lack of compelling stories. I mean, I've had some people who I asked them something that they failed at. Okay, so somebody gave me an example a while ago, and I said, well, so tell me something that you failed at. And they talked about how, as an intern, as an intern or a medical student, I don't remember anymore, how they had to draw someone's blood, and that they had failed to be able to draw the person's blood. Now, that, I'm sure that experience occurred. is that impactful? Does that have any, why would you pick that? It sounds so trite. Of course, we've all failed to be able to draw someone's blood, especially when we were learning. You have to use something bigger when you're asked, an experience where you failed. It has to be something meaningful, and it has to be an experience, for instance, that you can show what the opposite side of failure is, and that it's success, and it's not just being able to draw the person's blood the next time, right? That's a wasted opportunity to talk to your interviewer about something about yourself that could actually sway the interview absolutely in your favor. So lack of compelling stories, that's just one example, but people do. I think sometimes people have a host of great stories and they pick something that really isn't great. If you don't know what a great story is, ask one of your colleagues who's now a resident, ask your friends, which of these do you think would tell somebody more about who I am as a person, would highlight something about me. Don't pick something that's small. I mean, I know why people want to pick something small, because they don't want to say they failed. They think, oh, if I tell the program director I failed at something, they're going to think that there's something wrong with me. And so I pick something that's inconsequential. And that's really, they miss the mark, but I know why they do that. Lack of engagement, just going through the motions. I have had people, let me tell you, I've had individuals who've gone for fellowship interviews. They were outstanding candidates. They were conflicted about what they should be doing, where they should be going, if they should be doing fellowship. And you know what? They didn't get their fellowships. They didn't, because it came across as that they weren't engaged. They weren't interested. They didn't want to be there, even though they said, oh, I think my interview went fine. I know how they appeared. They did not appear as if the very place that they really wanted to be at that very moment was no other place than being with that interviewer. That's the kind of communication that you have to have, that you don't want to be anywhere else in the world except right there having that interview at that time. Smiling, facial expressions, all those things are good. I mean, you can't smile the whole time, but you can certainly communicate that. Okay, if ever you guys have seen TED Talks, and you see these TED Talks and they're just wonderful. Okay, so they're, usually what, 10 minutes to 20 minutes. I think 20 minutes is the max for a TED Talk. And I'm not telling you, any of you, that you talk about one subject for 10 minutes, because the average response in an interview should be a minute, except for maybe your opening, tell me about who you are as a person, tell me about yourself. That can be about 2 minutes. But you want to keep your answers short and to the point, because you don't want to appear as if you're taking over from the interviewer in terms of being in the driver's seat. The interviewer is in the driver's seat about how many questions and the pace of the interview. You want to answer the question, you want to focus, and then you want to give it back, cede the time back to the interviewer so that they can ask the next question and that they control the interview, because it should not be perceived that you are trying to control the interview. But when you get to a TED Talk, what's so compelling about TED Talks? They are great storytelling. It's a great story that they're telling, and they're telling it in a way that they make it seem spontaneous, but they probably told that story 200 times to get it to that point. They practiced and practiced and practiced. But it's a great story. It's relevant. It's applicable. It's fascinating. It's uniquely personal. And they have a great sequence, cadence, tone. I don't expect everybody here to be great TED Talkers, but for your interview, think about TED Talks, watch some of them, try to see what makes them a great talk. Because if you can distill that into 2 minutes in your interview, you will be acing your interviews. Okay, you have to demonstrate. The TED people, they have a love for their subject when they talk about it, right? You feel that they're totally engaged and they love what they're talking about. That's the kind of thing that you want to communicate in an interview. Okay, I think this is my last slide, and I apologize if I have gone over. It was kind of unclear to me, honestly, how long. I heard various things about how long this presentation should be or not. So I hope that I've kept within what are reasonable boundaries. But I tell people about a great interview response. Each answer that you give in an interview should advance your candidacy to the interviewer. It should not be wasted. Many people waste 50% or more of their responses by not having thought them out and not giving answers that are going to help me. They're going to be neutral or negative, but neutrality is not what you want. Every single answer that you give is an opportunity for you to shine. So why not use it and shine during your interview, right? The anatomy of an interview question, the way that you answer it, and this is not mine, this is from, many people who are interview specialists in all categories of interviews will tell you these 3 things that are important. Number 1, your answer has to be relevant and it has to be focused. If the interview asks a question, don't be a damn politician and answer some other question. They don't want to hear the answer to any other question but the question that they've asked you. If they've asked you specifically how you handle the situation, don't talk in generalities about how one might handle a situation. You have to talk about you. So focus on the question that's asked of you. And if you don't understand the question, just ask them to repeat the question. I didn't understand that. I really want to answer you. I want to get this right. And they'll repeat it and then you can understand. Okay, so your answer needs to be focused and relevant to what they're asking you. And each answer needs to demonstrate some exceptional quality about you through storytelling, whenever possible, whenever possible. So your interview should read like a collection of stories, but some of them are subtle. Some of them are just a little story. Some of them are maybe a longer story, but examples when you can of things that matter, that demonstrate your exceptionalism. And you don't say, I'm outstanding because. You tell the story, and the story tells the interviewer that you are exceptional. Whenever possible, you want to try to verify that quality by referring to some personal achievement. So for instance, let's say you are talking about your leadership skills. Reference the fact that you were given a lot of leadership opportunities and that after you demonstrated whatever it is with this one leadership opportunity, that they then decided that they were going to make you the leader of another committee or some such thing. So it demonstrates that they felt enough about your leadership skills that they sort of promoted you or assigned you a new task. Or if you've done something outstanding in terms of an achievement, that you say, I got a certificate for that was meaningful to me. You don't have to brag on it and feel like I was the number one, blah, 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 blah. Humbly let them know, remind them that you received a certificate in that and it has great meaning to you, right? Because that's really, to me, the importance of a certificate anyway, because of the work that you put into it. Something like that. So you remind them that you did receive an accolade. Now, there are many stories that you're going to tell that by virtue of telling the story, they're going to demonstrate and verify that compassion. Let's say you had a patient that you had to broach difficult things with, and the patient walked out of the clinic, didn't want to hear what you had to say that day, but then later you called them on the phone, you talked to them, you tried to, when they had cooled out a little bit, you explained to them why, considering taking their high blood pressure medicine was important, and they came back to clinic and they're still a patient in that clinic to this day, something like this, right? So a story that illustrates by virtue of what happened in the story that you were able to impact that patient, you were able to establish the trust with that patient that then carried forward that patient to do the right things and to care for themselves. And that, of course, is the essence of what we want to do as physicians, is to be able to tailor our approach to people, to care for people. And so that's what we get back, right? The joy that we have back is knowing that we've helped other individuals, and that really, the joy that they bring to us is manyfold more than what we really think we do for them. Okay. So that's it. That's it in a nutshell, what I've got for you today. I thank you all for being here and for caring about learning how to do this better. I believe that every single one of you probably has things that you can learn from or can become a better interviewer and a better, do applications better to position yourself, even if it's giving yourself a few extra little points here and there. Every little thing counts that you do. And so thank you again.
All right, thank you so much for that presentation. I think you gave us a really good description of what an application should look like and an interview should look like, and when we were working on this webinar, we had a few points that we wanted to be addressed. And as you were presenting, I was like, okay, all these points are like being addressed. And so thank you so much for all like these great tips and tricks. I feel like we've gained a lot of insight about what it's like. Yeah, and before we move forward, maybe you can tell us briefly about your residency application service and how folks here can benefit from that.
Oh, you mean my particular service?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
So what I do is review people's applications. So I'm happy to review ERIS applications before you submit them, right? I mean, people have sent me to look at them afterwards, but unless they're just knowing that they're going to need to reapply, the time to look at applications is before. So that you can really have them vetted and look at them, work on your personal statements. And so I'm available to do that for you. Most of what I've been doing lately, especially because of the cadence of the different seasons, is to do mock interviews with people. And so I will have an hour with them, essentially, where people have about 25 minutes to 25 to 30 minutes. I'll give them a mock interview. We'll record it so it's on Zoom so that they can have a copy of that to look back at. And then I spend about 30 minutes trying to do a deep dive over every single one of their questions that they've answered and how they can improve them. There are some people who need help on every question, and there are other individuals who do very well on certain questions, but not others. Again, I think that, it's just tweaking your answers and also recognizing sometimes what not to say or how to say certain things that can really make a difference for you. So I'm delighted to have anybody who's interested. I know there was some sponsorship or whatever opportunities here that people had, and I'll be grateful and excited to see any of you that show up this year, next year, in whatever capacity that I can help you. I'm here for that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we've had some questions that have been asked for Dr. Parker, which will come back after a few minutes. But before that, I would like to ask Dr. Tinsae about his experience as an IMG applying from Ethiopia and how that is. So maybe Dr. Tinsae, if you can tell us a little bit about how your application process was as you're applying from here. And also if you can add some of the challenges you've had applying as an IMG and how you overcame those challenges.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Parker, because sitting here, I learned so much. Every word is back, every word of the slide was really gold. It was really insightful. Not many people have this opportunity, being on the other side, learning from a program director, what the thought process is, how you recruit people. So I really, really highly suggest everyone here applying next year or in the coming years to utilize Dr. Parker's services, because this is a once in a million opportunity. So yes, applying from Ethiopia has its own significant challenges. First and foremost, it's like we don't have a standardized process where we can do like US clinical experience or electives and everything. So that's always a red flag. That's always a red flag for an applicant from Ethiopia, because not many people do actually have a physical US clinical experience. And this is something I want to know Dr. Parker's opinion as well. So how much do really tele-rotations weigh? Are really tele-rotations really weighed upon in this application process? So that's something I faced as an applicant, because I don't really have a US clinical experience. So that's one challenge. The second challenge is always, securing those letter of recommendations, especially our MSPs and everything. It's usually a school by school problem. Some schools are very good at Addis Ababa University, or St. Paul's have a standardized process where one can get MSP or Dean's letter. Other schools are like haphazard. So yeah, that's an issue. When it comes to interviews, sometimes, yes, I mean, any issue is the time difference. Sometimes interviews usually run late. Sometimes they can be here in the afternoon, here in Eastern time, and that's like midnight there in Ethiopia. So sometimes we might not be as so sharp. We might not be as so active, because like the time difference is kind of tricky, especially for somebody interviewing, let's say, in the West Coast program. So that's an issue. But this everything they are all, it can be manageable. They are not really that hard. And always lean upon somebody who has done this before you. Learn from people, take their experiences and their everything. Sitting here, I learned so much. So you never know where you're gonna learn. So always keep an open mind and be open to everything, and try to accommodate everything and every bit of information, because every single little thing helps. That 1% push on your application, that 1% push on your interview, that might be the difference between you matching or not. So never take things lightly. I always hear people, they take their tests, they do their applications and everything. So we're always fearful of asking for help, like say professional personal statement editing or interview practice, saying, hey, I don't want to spend that money. But the only way you can save money is if you match in your first cycle. Every year you're reapplying, you're losing money. Every year you're losing attending money. So do not hesitate on spending money trying to elevate your applications or anything. Just do not hesitate on this. This is my important advice, because the only way you can save money is if you match on your first attempt. That's it. So you already have spent thousands of money, I know, on the tests and everything. Do not neglect this part, especially the application process, the interview process. Do not neglect it. Like, this is a unique, a different challenge as it is. So you have to address it.
All right. Thank you for answering that. Maybe another question that we have for you, for Dr. Tinsae, is how much time do you use to prepare for your applications, and how much time does one need to prep for the applications prior to applying? And what do you think is the one thing someone should know before they start applying? Because I remember in our last session, you had said that you had spent so much time prepping for the USMLE exams that you had really not thought about anything past that. So what is your thoughts on the timeline?
Yeah, yes, exactly. So this is a mistake like most people make. So they think that the whole process is as simple as taking step 1 and step 2, then applying, then getting a residency interview. But actually, the most important step is, how do you frame your applications? How do you submit a cohesive and comprehensive applications? And how do you get the spots? Because the tests, they are just numbers. They don't really tell anything about you. They don't really, like Dr. Parker said, they actually do not even correlate to actual clinical performance. So they are just one aspect of the application requirement. Anybody can have a tick on. So always know the deadlines. The first step is, when is the deadline? When is the application due? So usually it's in September. So you have to give yourself ample space of time. You don't want to write your personal statement in the last 2 weeks. You'd have to start this planning like 2 months, 3 months in advance, have several drafts and go over it. Another thing you have to rely upon is usually the letter of recommendations and everything, the dean's letter, that they are not really under your control. They are under the control of somebody else submitting it on your behalf. So you don't really know when they're going to do it or how they're going to do it. So you always want to you want to give yourself plenty of time, because inevitably some challenges might arise. One of your letter recommenders might forget and not upload your letter. So you'd always have to have a backup plan and give yourself every bit of time. What I always say is, especially for IMG applicants, finish your step 2 and other requirements and OET and everything by July. So the whole months of August and September should be focused purely on your application, nothing else. Nothing. There shouldn't be a test schedule during that distracting you. It should always be your eras and eras. And after submitting your application, the journey doesn't stop there. You have to, again, prepare for interviews, because, like, again, interviews are the most important part. Like, somebody might look great on paper, but on interview day, if they don't perform, it's just be another applicant. Nothing really that sets them different. So yes, always at least give yourself at least minimum of 2 months to work on the application.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. It really, I don't see it from that angle. But if you don't give yourself time for that, you're gonna, all your hard work and all the money that you've spent on the USMLE and everything else, you're really not, you're not taking advantage of that. In terms of some other questions that you just asked, rotations, well, I think, you know, rotations in this country do become very important. I know that there are people that don't have them, but I would say one thing. Number one, the number of rotations in this country does not make that much difference. I don't think having, you know, some people just add on and add on and add on rotations, and I don't think that that is necessary. If you in any way can get here and get a rotation, there would be two things that I would say. Number one, you can probably, if you can get a rotation, and I know that's difficult to do, but people do manage to get those rotations one way or another, is that, and again, I hope this doesn't sound like, you know, negative, but you would really like the person who writes the letter of recommendation not to be from your country. Because it just looks suspicious. Now, I know from interviewing over the years that there are certain Ethiopians that have been well positioned in their careers here, you know, who are now a program director or head of a department or whatever, and they write these letters for everybody and anybody. And I know their names. I mean, literally, I go, another letter from that person. What does that mean? It means that they want to help, but it also means that I can't really believe anything that's in that letter. And what you really want is an authentic letter that says something about you, and that it's not influenced by just the fact that you're of the same country. So I know that those opportunities are very difficult, and sometimes it's the people that are in your, you know, that are from your country who are more willing to give you those experiences. But if they're willing to give you that experience, maybe they know someone who has a different last name, who isn't Ethiopian, who would also be willing to help with that experience. And so, you know, you can, you have a better, I think that letter has more meaning. The second is that if you do get to this country, you know, try to do some kind of volunteerism somewhere at the same time on the weekends, let's say, or, you know, extend your time a little bit. And I know these are all difficult things and costly things and all that. I'm not trying to minimize that, but a letter from somebody where you're working in a volunteer capacity can also have meaning, because it can articulate your language skills, your professionalism, your way of dealing with people. It can also be very meaningful in terms of how you communicate. So don't discount the fact that a powerful letter from someone other than someone who is a, you know, physician could be important to your application. Yeah, and I think it's like everything. When you ask people to write a letter, there are people who have the best intentions and they have no idea how to write a letter for you. They have no idea what they need to write. I see this over and over again. So I don't know the answer to that. It depends on your relationship with the person. We've always said you need to ask the person, do you feel that you can write me a really strong letter? But of course, if it's your one thing that you're doing in this country, you know, you're going to try to get a letter regardless. I mean, obviously, you're going to go there and you're going to try to perform in the best way you can so that you can get an exceptional letter. But some people don't know how to write good letters. So I think offering to the person who's writing the letter, asking them if they would have the time to sit down with you and talk to you about a few things that might enhance their understanding of you, so they could communicate to the person about something. Because usually it goes like this: the person says, you know, I'm writing on behalf of so-and-so, who graduated from one of the, you know, graduated from Addis Ababa University, one of the most distinguished medical schools in all of Ethiopia, you know, who excelled, and they worked with me in my clinic for, you know, 1 month duration. And then they say a few things about you. But sometimes they don't really, again, they don't tell a story about you. The ones that are great are the ones that tell something about you, how you interacted with people, how you had a knowledge level that was at the level of an intern or a resident, how you were one of the top 5% of individuals who have worked with them in the past. They can say, you know, I've had many residents, many medical students or whatever it is, you know, come work with me, and this person is in the top 5% of those people. That then has a lot of meaning. A lukewarm letter from the US, isn't really going to help you very much. Now, I don't know how you approach people in your own country because I don't know. Again, it's the same caveat is those people need to know you well, and you would hope that they could, write you a personal letter. I do recognize, unless I'm mistaken, that a lot of the relationships that you may have with some of your professors in Ethiopia are much more formalized, and there's a little bit of a trick to how you do that, or if you can. How you can somehow, position yourself differently with them. I don't have the answers. You all would have a better understanding of that than anyone else. So rotations and letters of recommendation, they do matter, but I would say you don't need a ton. I mean, some people put like how many observational experiences on their record. Some people are lucky to come to this country and they find all these observational things and they put 5 on their record. And they're 5 that they probably could give me 2, and that's what I really would prefer that they did. It's not quantity, it's quality. It really is quality. And then there's the personal statement, which we haven't even touched on, but the personal statement is your opportunity too to talk about certain things, to give them a sense that you're capable of doing many things that they might be looking at the LORs, your letters of recommendation, to affirm. So, you want to sort of pitch yourself away too in your personal statements, which again, I've read too many that are exactly one. I could take 100 of personal statements and put them one after the other, and they all sound the same. And I tell them, I'm not trying to discount the difficulties and the struggles that you went through, but there's nothing particularly unique about this personal statement that is going to say anything to me, because a lot of the personal statements start with, and again, I mean nothing negative, but they start with, I was born in a rural area in Ethiopia to 2 parents who were farmers, and I walked barefoot to my school, and blah, blah, blah. And then, I understood the importance of education and this, that, and the other thing. These are incredible stories to me, because I can't imagine. And it's not that I don't have incredible, I honor people for being able to walk in this path, but they're not unique, nor is the grandmother who was sick, who propelled you into a medical career, unique either. 90% of the applications I see, that's the story. And that really isn't the whole story. That's just a little piece of the story. So I would urge you that those personal statements, and I know I've sort of gone outside of what we were talking about, but I would urge you that those personal statements need to really be, they're hard to write, and they need a lot of attention. And you want the first sentence to grab your reader. The first sentence to grab your reader. And I've seen ones that are like that you read the first sentence and you're like, I've got to read this. I've got to read it. That's what you want. Personal statements can either really, really help you, or they're kind of neutral to me. They're just, or they can hurt you if they're horrible, if they're written horribly with horrible grammar and sentences that don't have, they're not even a constructed sentence. I've seen ones that are just phrases. They're not even sentences. That's going to hurt you. And don't rely on, trust me, don't rely on your fellow Ethiopians to read and correct your grammar. That's not a good idea. It really isn't. You need someone who's an English speaker, who's English is their first language, to really look at your personal statement and review it. And then there are other personal statements of people, and you can tell that either they had somebody write it for them, or they went to a thesaurus and they tried to find all these big words to use, and they use all these big words because they think it sounds more impressive. And that to me is really transparent too. So, all right, I've gone off topic here, but those are a few other comments.
Thank you so much, Dr. Parker. That was very insightful. We have a few questions for you that was asked directly. I doubt we'll go through all of them, but we'll pick a few and try to address it. So I'll try to read one directly. So the first question is, in your experience as a program director and your conversations with other program directors, what are the chances of a medical doctor who followed a non-traditional path, such as some work history in clinical area and others in public health? What are the risks and perks of following this path? Let's assume that I have a PhD and publications and still want to do residency soon. So how would that look like? Thanks.
Well, I think all those things can really be enhancements to your application, especially if you highlight, skill sets that you learned in that, and you have a good, you can explain why you're stepping back, let's say, from a PhD and you're moving into clinical medicine. I don't think it's a deterrent. Now, I think it is difficult for people if they spent 20 years as a PhD researcher to make a case for why now at this moment do they want to do medicine. I do think that that's hard. It's not impossible, and it's not, again, no disrespect for people who have done amazing things, but it is kind of hard to square that kind of a situation. But having an MPH, having an MPH, many people have MPHs, and it can actually be a wonderful thing to highlight on your application. I believe, it attests to some degree that you have research skills, that you have a bent towards looking at data and evaluating things. You may have areas that you've used for your MPH in public health or quality and safety or things like that absolutely positively are correlated with physician work. And I think those things can enhance your resume.
Thank you for that answer. Another question I didn't want to miss without addressing is, what are the questions usually asked for IMG applicant women with children? What are the challenges faced by them, and what do you want to hear from them during interview? And are programs open for women with children, and what might be your advice?
All right, that's a loaded question, isn't it? First of all, guys, they cannot ask you any questions about your children, your husband, your not husband. Those are actually forbidden questions. And we as program directors, when we every year when we sign the agreement with the match, we have to promise that we will not ask a list of questions, nor will anybody else that's part of our interview team ask those questions. Because if we do, and it gets reported back to the NRMP, we can actually lose our ability to recruit residents for whatever time they deem appropriate. They can actually say, we're not letting you have anybody in your program for a year, for 2 years, or ever again, I guess, if it's repetitive behavior. I don't really know how much that's often done, but it is not questions that you should be asked. Now, will you be asked questions like that? You might. And if you are asked questions, you have to figure out how to answer them. I would probably not, if you're asked those kinds of questions, point out to the person that it's an illegal question. I might answer it in some way and then move on from it and say, something that I'd really like to highlight instead of talking about that a lot. However, it is okay if you bring up things about your children. If you have children, you can bring them up. If you have a spouse, you can bring those things up. But you have to be careful as to how you do that. Everybody wants to believe that whoever they pick for residency is going to be able to make it through and does not have so many other competing responsibilities, they are not going to be an effective resident. Having children at home, especially young children, as I know from my own personal experience, is another full-time job. It can be done, and people go to residency and they have children, but I don't think that it's something that you probably want to advertise, because people may make the assumption that that is going to be more difficult for you to complete your residency. This is true of men too. Let's not forget, it's not, we think about it as women only, but I still remember a resident. In the course of my career, I had five people that I had to hold back from their training and had to repeat a year. And one of them was actually an Ethiopian male who was exceptional, but he was exceptional too because he had 3 children that were under age 5 in his first year of training, and his wife had diabetes with DKA, and he tried to be an intern and to take care of those children at home. And of course it didn't work. He came to work and he was exhausted and he couldn't remember, he couldn't do his work because he was, walking around like a zombie. So I say this saying that these things apply to men too. So I wouldn't advertise if you have a whole, if you have a whole, bunch of kids, I don't think I'd advertise it. Now, I would tell them if you do talk about your children or your spouse, I think the way to discuss it is, first of all, is how much of a source of strength they are to you and how much they support you and that they have supported you throughout your journey and continue to be your support. I think that is an appropriate way if you talk about your children to highlight them. I think you have to be really careful if you are here, if you are planning to be in this country because of visa issues or whatever, and your children and your spouse are going to be not in this country with you, or that you're uncertain about that. Because that, again, raises the situation. It raised it with me as a program director, especially with women. I mean, it's not like it couldn't have been with men, because surely they have some of the same feelings about their children. But I had women who left their children in another country and had tremendous depression about it, and it affected their performance in residency. So I do not think that you want to advertise if you are not with your children. But if you are all in this country as a unit and you are coming together, and your family is a great source of strength to you, I probably would mention it, because it allays any program director's fear of whether or not that's going to be an issue. So you don't have to tell them how many kids. You just have to say, my family has been incredibly supportive. They're here. They will be with me wherever I am in my journey, physically, emotionally, spiritually, for me. And I think then it helps to let the program director know that you have that additional layer of support for residency.
Thank you so much.
Is that helpful? I hope. Yeah.
I'm sure it was very helpful. Maybe a repetitive question that I see is about year of graduation. How much does year of graduation matter for applicants, and how significant is it in interviewing and matching if they have done residency in their country and trying to apply there again?
So in my mind, residency in your country was always a good thing. It meant to me that I was going to get somebody who had, some very, very relevant experience. And if they had graduated from a major university program in another country, that at least it assured me that they had, an ability to take care of patients, the history taking, the physical exam, those things were, now depending on the country, because I can tell you it's not the same for every place, but those things reassured me to some extent. The year of graduation is interesting. It's often used as a screening tool, and people will screen out individuals who are older. I can't tell you how many people screen in, screen out. I've interviewed people that have been out for many years, and they were exceptional candidates. They had done exceptional things, and life circumstances had been such that it just took them longer to get here. And again, this is a place where you have that part in your ARIS application to talk about impact, things that impacted your ability, let's say, to be a traditional applicant, whatever that is. But that's your opportunity to talk about that your journey has been a lot longer, and and here are some of the struggles, and here's why it's taken you this long to decide to do this. To me, I've had people that are many, many years out and proved to be excellent. Now, the other category of people are individuals who in your own country did something else. So for instance, people who were surgeons who are not now applying for medicine, people who were urologists who are now applying for family medicine. That is a difficult thing to navigate, because really, I think your job is to demonstrate. Most people will say, I was always interested in family medicine. I was always interested in internal medicine. It was just because of the fact that my country had needs for surgeons. And so I ended up, finding myself in a surgical subspecialty, but it wasn't where my love was. Now I'm sort of returning to home, as they say. I'm returning to where I feel like that I belong. And I have no reason to believe them or disbelieve them. I mean, I usually believe the story, and I think that that's probably a reasonable place to begin with some of that. But if you've done something that's purely surgical, I believe that the importance is to convey how many of those skills, even if the operative skills aren't really something that are going to translate into medicine, how you're really well aware that your skill set of of listening to people, of talking to people, of following up, of your conscientious nature, all of those things are transferable to any kind of medicine, and that the skill set that you have, that you learned in general surgery, even though you're not going to be in the operating theater anymore, that really the rest of it is completely transferable, but that you do recognize that you have to catch up with your internal medicine knowledge base. And hopefully you'll have demonstrated some of that with your USMLEs. Some of it hopefully will be demonstrated with your grades in medicine when you did take medicine, and that. But I think those are the challenges: the time away, how are you going to couch that? And if you've been doing another specialty, how do you frame that so people are interested in you?
All right. Thank you so much for that detailed explanation. I think today we've gotten a lot of a sense of what it is and what to expect. And we'd like to thank you again, Dr. Parker, for all the detailed explanation to all the questions that we asked and all the concerns that our participants had. Due to a lack of time, we won't be taking any more questions. We hope this was really helpful. Personally, I found this to be a very helpful session for someone either who's about to start their USMLE journey or someone who's already done the exams and is on the application stage. Before we wrap up, as you all know, we had a special mentorship opportunity to have a paid session with Dr. Parker, which we would like to thank Dr. Redit and her colleagues for organizing the session. And after many applications, we were able to pick 14 applicants who will get a special mentorship session with Dr. Parker. We will be sending the emails to the applicants in the next coming days, and they will get a chance to have a session with Dr. Parker. And for those who have been asking about how to contact Dr. Parker or how to get her services, we have sent a link in the chat box, and you can go to our website and you'll be able to access all her services. Again, I'd like to thank our guests, Dr. Parker and Dr. Tinsae, for being with us today on a Sunday morning. We look forward to hearing about the experience of our participants. Yeah, thank you so much. We hope to see you at the session. All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you all.
All right. Bye.